Now I get the joy of introducing Jessica Kaplan. Jessica is a board member of the Arlington Historical Society. She is a retired archivist. She has led this project and worked in coordination with the Black Heritage Museum to research with a team of people where were the enslaved in Arlington, and where did they live and how did they live. And tonight she's going to be sharing some of the stories that they have uncovered, and she's also going to be talking about some of the challenges that they have faced in researching this unique subject. Jessica, please.
So kind of just.
So do you want to, Mark?
Okay. Sorry, now that we don't have this, I just need to get a little.
Talk to the computer for the people on Zoom, talk to that mic for the people in the room.
Okay.
So talk between.
Isn't this about the bottom tonight? Wait, no. Inside joke, I don't know if you guys saw, Arl now had an article about the bottom, an article I'd written several years ago, which was a Black enclave up by Chain Bridge. And the county is looking at buying the property at this point, and they wanted some input on what would be the best use of that property. And it's a lovely sort of treat and canopy area right now with Kimmett Run running through it. And I did say to them that I thought they should leave it as a park, and that we needed signage there about the African-Americans who settled there beginning in 1850. And hopefully a little archaeological dig for Patrick. Anyway, so just thought I'd start with that since we're wasting a little bit of time. Okay, I am going to start memorializing the enslaved in Arlington. So first of all, thank you for having me tonight to talk about memorializing the enslaved in Arlington. It's a project to recover the history of our county's enslaved people and to honor their contributions. So before I begin the talk, I wanted to introduce you to my co-coordinators on the project. Neither one is physically in the audience, but their names are Tim Aiken, and I know he's online, and hopefully Scott Taylor of the Black Heritage Museum of Arlington is online as well. Tim is the one who brought the idea of this project to the Historical Society, and the minute I heard about it, I knew that I had to take part in it, and it just was close to my heart. So thank you, Tim and Scott, because this project would not be happening without them. Okay, how do I progress this?
The arrow key down by the computer.
Oh, there. Okay. Whoops, one too far. Okay, are most people able to watch this on their phone?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll try and give you visuals if I can. So right now there's a picture of 3 enslaved people in front of Arlington House. It's Selena Gray, and that's the visual. And this is what I'm going to say. Tonight, I'd like to introduce you to the purpose of memorializing the enslaved in Arlington. I'd like to update you on what's been done when the project started about 1.5 years ago. And I want to let you know what our hopes are for the future. So the history of slavery in Arlington is not a light topic, but within the history, there were real people. And by finding their names and any other details we can about their past, we hope to bring them to life and to honor their humanity. So this next slide has a picture of a diary of a man named Bushrod Hunter, who owned many enslaved people in Arlington. But it also has a list of the primary source documents that I've used that I was using along with my researchers in conducting research on this project. I had a team of 5 individuals, and we scoured probate records, which were wills, accounts, and inventories. We looked at court records, manumission records, newspapers, diaries, letters, the census, maps, photographs, and illustrations, tax records, deeds and land records, vital records such as birth, death, and marriage records, and finally, even a few grave sites that still exist. So I would say the richest source of all those I mentioned were the probate records. And these are the administrative records when someone passes away. And they had the most names and the most information on relationships. So they're very useful, but also they were really heartbreaking because they always listed people as property, and it was just relentless and difficult to look at. Okay, I'd like to focus tonight on the results to date of our research and to tell some of the compelling stories that I've learned. I have a list of things that are up on the Historical Society website on my screen. There is a timeline of slavery in Arlington. There is a spreadsheet of enslaved individuals. There's an article on runaway and other newspaper advertisements. There is a segment called Climbing Jacob's Ladder, which is stories of Arlington's enslaved people. And I have APS lesson plans that aren't up on the website, but will be going up. And if we do get a bulb, you might even get to see our first stumbling stone. And for all of you who do have a screen, there is a link to the website that takes you exactly to the Memorializing the Enslaved page. Sometimes it's a little tricky to find things. So, okay. All right, I am starting with the Arlington slavery timeline, and it's actually one of the most important things that's on our website. It provides really needed historical context to the research. So definitely take a look at it so you understand what was going on in the 17th century, 18th century, and 19th century in Arlington when enslaved people lived here. I have a shortened timeline that's on the screen here, and luckily you don't really have to see this. But it begins in 1669, it's bookended, 1669, and it ends in 1865 with the 13th Amendment and the abolishment of slavery in the United States. So why 1669? Well, that is when Robert Halson received a land grant of 6,000 acres of land in the northern neck along the Potomac River, and that encompassed a good slice of Arlington. He received the land grant in exchange for bringing 120 individuals, settlers, to the region. And among those settlers were 10 Negroids. That's what it said in the records. And they are the first enslaved that have a connection to Arlington. So the timeline ends in 1865, as I said, with the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which was in December of 1865, and that formally abolished slavery in the United States. There are 2 more points on the timeline that I'd like to touch on briefly. When Robert Halson came to the Potomac region, Arlington was part of Stafford County. During the 18th and 19th century, Arlington became part of several different jurisdictions. And I feel like every time I give a talk, I talk about these jurisdictional changes, but they really are important because they had an impact on, you know, the laws where you lived. So in 1731, the area that we call Arlington was part of Prince William County. And by 1742, it became part of Fairfax County. So it was part of Fairfax until 1801, when it was ceded to the federal government to become part of the District of Columbia. So it became the new capital city. And of course, it was then retroceded back to Virginia in 1846, and it became Alexandria County at that point. So it remained Alexandria County throughout the rest of the 19th century and formally became Arlington in 1920. I'm going to use Arlington tonight, no matter what time period I'm talking about. So bear with me. I know it's really historically incorrect, but you don't want to listen to my tongue-tied talking. Okay. Another point of importance occurred in 1828. And this is when Franklin and Armfield opened a domestic slave trading operation in Alexandria City. How many of you guys know about Franklin and Armfield? Okay, so a good chunk of you. I have to say I'd heard of them before I started my research, but I had no idea the impact they had on this area. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about that. Around this time, in Arlington and the Mid-Atlantic region, there were an excess number of enslaved people. The economy had been a tobacco raising economy, and it had slowly shifted to a mixed farming community economy, where wheat and corn and rye and vegetables were becoming the staples that were grown. Fewer slaves were needed to tend a mixed crop. So there were a lot of excess slaves, and the expenses of keeping an excess slave in your household, if you're an enslaver, became sometimes just too expensive. So local enslavers basically were feeling the pinch, and they had three options of what to do with their problem. One was to hire out their enslaved people to others needing their services. And this was actually very, very common throughout this region. Another option was to free their slaves. Didn't happen so much. Did happen, but not to a large extent. The third option was to sell their enslaved people to the Deep South, to the cotton and the sugar plantations, where they needed more enslaved people to work the farms. The traders, Armfield and Franklin, exploited this third option, transferring hundreds of thousands of enslaved people from up here down to the Deep South. And they didn't just transfer them nicely. They were in chains, in the holds of boats, very reminiscent of the initial slave trade coming over from Africa. Very brutal. And Franklin and Armfield made a fortune off this business. Families in Arlington were brutally torn apart, and a lot of their young people were sold, and the older remained. And there was sort of an imbalance in ages at that point here. Families that weren't impacted lived in fear that this could happen to them. So it was a very trying time. And I feel like a very shameful and abhorrent chunk of our history that we should not forget. And there really is a fantastic visual, if you have a phone, of a painting of a coffle, which is a line of enslaved people being led down south. Okay, so now a little bit of the funner part. On my screen is a spreadsheet. And it's probably the most important resource that's on our website right now. And it houses all the raw data that we found during our research. And I want to thank David Fox, who's sitting, I'm pointing right at him, he's waving, because he made this spreadsheet a reality. I absolutely could not have done any of the computer work without him. He's just a whiz, and I can't thank him enough. You're going to be hearing his name several times tonight. Anyway, we hope this source is going to be really, really important for people looking for family, and for anyone interested in the study of slavery or local history in Arlington. The spreadsheet was inspired by enslaved.org, which is an open source database that's online. And whenever possible, we use their data model, and that included data fields and controlled vocabulary. And that's a little wonky, but I'm going to move to the next slide. And I have a listing of data fields, and I'll just read them off. They include enslaver's name, enslaved date of birth, enslaved date of death, enslaved gender, enslaved children, enslaved mother, father, enslaved occupation. There is source citation, source date, although on here it says Kate, location of residence, notes. There's also something called events, and these were ways that enslaved people were documented as property within our legal system. So we have things like appraisals and births, deaths, disappearance, emancipation, legal proceedings, mortgages, registrations, transfer or sale. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. I know if you could see it visually, it would make a little bit more sense. So I just want to say, when you visit the website, and I hope all of you do, that the spreadsheet isn't completely filled in for every enslaved person we have on there, because the information doesn't exist. So I might have enslaved name, but I won't necessarily have a birth date or a death date. Or it might say for enslaved name, unknown, and have then information about a source that like the census, where someone isn't named in a census, so that I pulled that unknown person from there. So it's really, it's a really good spreadsheet. I also want you to know that the spreadsheet's a work in progress. So we have a lot more census information that we need to put on the site, but I really wanted to get my information up there and get people interested in seeing what was going on. So up it went. Okay. So the next slide's important too. It's Arlington's enslaved population, and I'll just read it. So the first population tabulations I have are from 1749. And this is when Arlington was part of Truro Parish, which encompassed Arlington and a big chunk of Fairfax County. There were 1,674 enslaved people in Truro Parish, and that accounted for about 33% of the population. So my next data comes from the 19th century. In 1800, there were 297 enslaved people in Arlington, and that was 30% of the population. In 1840, there were 290 enslaved, 20% of the population. By 1860, there were 265 enslaved. And I don't know if you've been able to tabulate in your head, but the numbers are decreasing. So slavery was actually very, very slowly going down in this area. or shall I say, the numbers of slaves was decreasing, not that slavery was going, it was going down, the Civil War was coming, but, okay. So the next slide is, it's about the findings of, preliminary findings of the data. And I've been able to, with the help of researchers, find about 1,500 enslaved people. There's going to be more. What I'm really proud of is that we found 800 named people, and those are 800 people that are no longer forgotten. So that is incredible. There were 111 enslavers, and there were roughly 95 locations of enslavement. Some sites had multiple slave owners living there over time, so they're counted a couple times, but we're not going to worry about that now. 49 locations had 1 to 5 enslaved persons. 29 locations had 6 to 9. 10 locations had 10 to 15. And about 5 to 10 had 16 or more. The largest plantations had the majority of enslaved individuals. So the largest plantation would be, anyone? Arlington House, Abington. Okay. Okay. Abington, which, nope. Abington?
No.
It's just a technical problem of a night. Should I use that one? One of these other ones? Okay.
Try it now.
Okay.
It's red, light's red. So let's see.
Okay. Better? Yeah. I can hear it. Let's see. So largest plantations, Arlington House, Abington, Glebe House, which has a very long history of enslavement, and Prospect Hill, which is in South Arlington, not too far from the Hume School. Did it again.
Almost switched lights. I think the battery, that one is dying.
Funny thing happened on the way to Coliseum. How's this? Can you hear me? No.
For heaven's sakes.
How about now?
No, not on. Okay, no, nope.
Da, 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 da. Hello? No.
It's not plugged in.
No, maybe we should.
Yeah. Just have to shout.
Okay. I'm just gonna shout. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
I'll keep working on this.
I'm a mother, so my voice can carry. Anyway, a majority of sites were operated by enslavers that had a small number of enslaved people. So now this, I'm really, really sad that there's no visual because it's amazing. It's an interactive map that David Fox created. And basically it, thank you. Someone told me to move my slide. The map links to the data in the spreadsheet. So basically all the locations of enslavement are marked by little blue tabs, and you can click on the little blue tab and it takes you to that enslaver in the website and lists all their enslaved people and all the information we have on them. So it's very exciting and it's very new. So I hope all of you will go and try it out. I have a little demonstration, but of how it would work. So I think I'm just going to skip that because I think it would be too difficult. I just click on a few sites and we go through the documentation I have that pops up, which is just cool. All right, another night. Okay. All right. On my screen is picture of two runaway slave newspaper ads. And there's a title above it that refers to an article that's on the website about newspaper advertisements. And it was written by a woman named Rebecca Leet, a volunteer. It's a great article. Please check it out. It's got a lot of, oh, good. It's got a lot of different runaway ads and other types of advertisements like auction ads where they were selling people. And it's just really, I found quite a few names and a lot of information about some of the enslaved. I'm just going to read you a little portion of one of the ads to give you a flavor. So there's a $40 reward. Ran away while in the employ of Mr. John A. Summers. On the 20th of February last, a yellow girl named Sarah, about 20 years of age, slender, narrow face, has a long underjaw and lip, and has a down look when spoken to, and a small speech and a small impediment in her speech, and has been raised as a house servant, is a smart, brisk girl. So right there, wow, that tells you so much about Sarah. The next person the ad mentions is her sister, Rebecca, who's 18. I'm not going to read the entire thing. And she was a house servant as well for the brother of John Summers. The two young ladies fled their plantations and they went to, it's inferred in the ad that they went to see their mother in Washington City. She calls herself Maria Simpson. And she lives in the valley northwest 6 buildings. No idea where that is. And I've Googled it. Does anyone here have any idea? That would, if you do, let me know. And I found that little piece about fleeing to their mother very interesting, because runaway ads really weren't always about people fleeing for freedom. They were about people running to go see their loved ones who they had been separated from. And it makes a lot of sense. And this area especially, DC was the main city, Alexandria was the city, but Arlington was very rural. People had homes in sometimes all 3 communities, and their family members were living in different areas. Other times they had been sold to someone in the area. The other ad I have is for a servant man. And there's a $50 reward, will be paid for apprehension of him. His name is Orville, provided he is secured in any jail so that I get him again. He is very like about the cities of the district or their neighborhood in Virginia, which has frequently been the case before. He left home on Saturday, 22nd of August, to visit his wife, who lives with the widow of the late Mr. Towers. Orville is a mulatto, not very bright, about 30 years of age, short and stout with a broad face, and I think a scar on the forehead. B.W. Hunter, Alexandria County, Virginia. So B.W. Hunter was Bushrod Hunter. He was the son of Alexander Hunter, and he was the husband of Alexander. The brother, I'll get it right. The brother of Alexander Hunter, who owned Abington in the 19th century, part of it. And when Alexander died away, B.W. Hunter's son inherited it, but he was under 18, so B.W. Hunter was operating the plantation during this time. Okay. I have a really lovely picture of Freedman's Village with a lot of the residents living there spread out in front of it. That was taken in 1863. And that's what's on the screen. And this is for a section called Climbing Jacob's Ladder that has stories about the enslaved that I've been able to piece together using the documents that that we've uncovered. And I say I, and that is totally wrong because a lot of these stories were written by volunteers. And of course, I had lots of help with research. The title for Climbing Jacob's Ladder comes from the spiritual, We're Climbing Jacob's Ladder, which evokes the hard journey to a higher emotional and spiritual place and overcoming slavery. Okay, and before I get into the complete stories that we've gathered, I'd like to tell some small, undefined, and abbreviated stories of the enslaved people from Arlington. And if you look on your screen, on the left-hand side is a 1782 Fairfax County tax list. And on that list, I've put a box around a man named Reverend David Griffith, who owned 11 slaves. This is the story of a simple number, 11. Reverend David Griffith owned 11 enslaved, 11 people rendered into a number. He was a man of God, the minister of the Fairfax Parish, who lived at Glebe House throughout the 1780s. The next screen shows a photograph of the 1850 census, and the heading says, oops. Let's see. Oops. In the case of slaves, substitute numbers for names. 1850 U.S. Census instructions. So this story involves numbers as well. It was the law to substitute numbers for names in the United States Census. This was a form of dehumanization imposed by the federal government in its census instructions. In this 1860 document of the census, if you look at your screen, you'll see that the name of the slave owner is on your far left. And under the slave owner, you have the enslaved people, and you get an age, you get a gender, and you get a color, mulatto or black. And that is it. In this story of the enslaved people of Arlington, William Hardin named his enslaved. Their names are part of an inventory, which I have on the screen, of Hardin's property. And it was produced upon his death in 1871. So the names on the inventory are Daniel, Sharper, James, Kate, Joe, Hannah, Bet, and Pat. This little shred of humanity was simply incidental, because as you continue to read this document, you see that all of them have a monetary value and that they are placed beside livestock. And it's disturbing. 19th century records provide more names and relationship information, a lot more detail on the enslaved than the 18th century ones. But they also provide a little bit more of the horror of slavery. What I have on the screen is the story of Eliza told through documents. On the left-hand side, I have an inventory from her first owner's probate records. And this was in 1818. It was a man named Archibald Taylor. And I've put a box around a woman named Eliza's entry here. It says 1 cow, $18. Monarchy and her child Eliza, $200. 4 years after this document, in 1822, Eliza and her mother were placed in a trust by Archibald's widow, Elizabeth Taylor. And it was for the benefit of her children. And the trustee was her brother, Samuel Birch, who didn't live too far from here. And he became Eliza's new enslaver. Over the years, Eliza remained with Birch and had 2 children. And in 1844, something rather extraordinary happened. And there's a document to the right of the screen, which is a Chancery Court record that describes this document, that describes what happened. Elizabeth Taylor's son, his name was William Taylor, abducted Eliza from Samuel Birch's farm and attempted to sell her south. He got in touch with slave traders and was about to make the transaction. Samuel Birch found out about it, ran to the county courthouse and stopped him with an injunction. So what's on the screen is the injunction. So he succeeded in keeping Eliza from being sold south, but every time I read that court document, I kind of feel the terror that Eliza must have felt when she was abducted. The next slide is of about a woman named Julia Roberts. And she was a remarkably courageous and woman of perseverance. And I really find her story inspirational. So on the left is a document. It's a deed of manumission that was executed in 1801 by Simon Summers. In the document, he frees, after 12 years, several of his current slaves. And when the children of these enslaved women turn 25, they can then be freed as well. I hope that makes sense. Julia was one of these children. In this document, Summers claimed that he was manumitting these slaves down the road because slavery was contrary to the spirit of Christianity and humanity. So as time progressed, many aspects of this deed weren't adhered to. And there was a change in jurisdictions, and you know what that means, trouble. So Julia turned 25, and her enslavers, Summers' daughter and son-in-law, refused to free her. So Julia turned to the DC court system. In 1842, she sued for her freedom, and the case was appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, and she won. So no small feat for a woman considered property. Here's another story. It's about a woman named Winnie Steele, and she was born between 1800 and 1810. And her first known enslaver was a man named Basil Williams. And he had a large farm by what is now Arlington View, which is Columbia Pike up by the Air Force Memorial. She toiled for Williams until his death in 1854. And in his will, he freed her and he freed the rest of his slaves. And he also gave them $20 to assist in their moving to Liberia or out west. And he wrote, "I will that the following named servants be paid each $20 by executors after my death to assist in conveying them to Liberia or any portion of the Western United States, which they may feel disposed or permitted to live, namely Thornton, Lewis, Daniel, Jackson, Harriet, Winnie, Sally, and Fanny." So Winnie did not take Williams up on his offer to go to Liberia. Instead, she went to DC and she moved there with her children and Fanny Butler, who was another one of Williams' enslaved people who had children as well. And I feel like they probably pooled their resources and made that difficult transition from an enslaved person to a free person during that time period. In the 1870s and 1880s, Winnie is also living in DC. She's on the census and she's there with her 3 children. She has a son named Elijah, a daughter named Winnie, and a daughter named Sarah. Winnie is taking in washing, as is her daughter. She lived until 1894 and was buried in Harmony Cemetery, which is on 9th Street Northeast and Rhode Island Avenue. So I was really able to find a lot of information on her. It was very satisfying. I don't know how many of you have heard the story of Wesley Norris. So he was an enslaved person at Arlington House. Okay, well, he was born in 1832. Whoops, lost it again. Hello? Oh, I think no. Hello? Hello? Okay. Okay, so, okay. Wesley grew up at Arlington House. It was the plantation of George Washington Parke Custis, now Arlington National Cemetery. Custis died in 1857, and his daughter, Mary Custis Lee, the wife of Robert E. Lee, inherited the property and his enslaved people. In his will, Custis had promised his enslaved people freedom within 5 years. Well, Lee decided to keep them for the 5 years, not keep them within 5 years. And a lot of the enslaved people at Arlington House felt that they should be freed immediately. And there was a lot of disgruntlement. And Wesley Norris and his sister and one other individual took matters into their own hands and fled from the estate. They were going towards Pennsylvania when Lee had them apprehended and brought back to Arlington House and beaten. Years later, probably about 5 years later, Wesley Norris wrote a piece for the New York Tribune in which he described this beating. And I'm just going to read an excerpt from it. We were immediately taken before General Lee. We told him we considered ourselves free. He then told us he would teach us a lesson we wouldn't forget. We were firmly tied to posts by a Mr. Gwynn, our overseer, who was ordered by General Lee to strip us to the waist and give us 50 lashes each, except my sister, who received 20. The overseer had sufficient humanity to decline whipping us. Accordingly, a county constable was called in who gave us the number of lashes ordered. General Lee stood by and enjoined the constable to lay it on well. Not satisfied with simply lacerating our naked flesh, General Lee ordered our backs to be thoroughly washed with brine. So, very ugly incident. After the beating, Lee had both Wesley and his sister hired out. Wesley was sent to Southern Virginia to work on a railroad doing hard labor. His sister became a house servant in Richmond. Then the Civil War broke out. Wesley was able to escape to Union lines and then slowly made his way back to Arlington. After the war, he became a grave digger at Arlington National Cemetery and was one of the key people in digging the graves for Section 27, which is the African-American section. So, you know, Lee only was running Arlington House for a few years. It really was the Custis Mansion throughout, you know, the rest of the century. But he did manage to make a lot of trouble in those years. So hopefully we've given you a taste of what we've discovered about the enslaved people who live where we live now. Now Now I'd like to discuss what we have planned for the future. And I really wish everybody could take a look at the slides, because there's 3 slides of what are called Stolperstein or stumbling stones. And these are brass plaques that started out in Germany to honor Holocaust victims. And now they're all over Europe. I have pictures of them in Amsterdam and Rome, as well as Berlin. And we would like to use stumbling stones in Arlington to honor the enslaved who lived here. So there's a photo of our first plaque. Very, very proud of this first plaque. And it was created by the Career and Tech Ed team, actually, at the Career Center. One of who's here tonight, Jordan Kivitz, you could raise your hand. Both the Career Center, WL, and probably 1 or 2 middle schools are going to be involved in manufacturing the stones for us, which is really quite exciting. And we believe they're going to be really powerful teaching tools, because as students manufacture these plaques, they're going to learn about the life of the enslaved person who's on their plaque. So like, what could be more meaningful? I'd like to thank Chris Martini, who is the Director of Technology and Adult Education at the Arlington Public School System, and all the CTE teachers who've been involved in this project. Like, you guys, hats off, you're amazing. Thank you. We would like to place our first stumbling stone this fall at the Ball Sellers House. We'll let you know when we have an exact date, but there'll be a big dedication ceremony and you're all invited. All right. In addition to creating stumbling stones with APS CTE teachers, we worked with social studies teachers last year, and we produced lesson plans. They produced lesson plans on slavery in Arlington. And we're really excited that they're going to be taught in a few of the classrooms this year. And on the screen is the front page of one of the lesson plans. It's the high school version. So that's pretty exciting. Well, I hope you've enjoyed learning about memorializing, it's a mouthful, the enslaved in Arlington. And I have a slide that says, thank you, Virginia Humanities and JBG Cares, who are 2 of our funders. Fantastic. We really couldn't have done it without them. Your help's been invaluable. And I have a slide of all the volunteers that have worked on the program. And I wasn't going to read your names, but now I am. So Janelle Anthony, who's here, raise your hand, help me with research. There's Matt Couples, who's a CTE teacher. How about you clap at the end? That's probably easier. Simon DeGroot, a researcher. Veronica Denoa, a researcher. Mary Beth Donnelly, a social studies teacher. Carolyn Eaton, a researcher. Sue Eisenfeld, who's been doing writing. David Fox, who you've met. Heidi Fritchel back here, who's been doing writing. Kyle Godfrey, CTE teacher. Sandra Green, who wrote a letter of support for me. Adam Hall, Gareth Hall, Miat Harrison, Michelle Hill, Carrie Hirsch, Wilma Jones from Halls Hill, Barbara Cannonen was here, who wrote a letter of support. Jordan Kivitz, who I've already introduced, a CTE teacher. Rebecca Leet, a writer. Chris Martini. A very special shout out to Larissa Masri, who was my grant writer, who's an amazing grant writer and did everything, spent hours as a volunteer. and did a fantastic job. Tony Price, Andrea Relator Mendoza, Brennan Park, who's an Eagle Scout who did research and helped put together our brochure. Annette Sherbert was a researcher and she's in the audience, so you can raise your hand. Natalie Torrentinos, JT Turner, Peter Vasilopoulos, who's back here and helping me with technology. Colin James Wilson, my husband, Joe Yucha, who's listened to this talk 3 times this week. The entire AHS board and the Black Heritage Museum of Arlington. And last but not least, if you are interested in volunteering, we still need help. We need to keep building the spreadsheet and refining it, and that takes time and detail. We need more stories to write up because we'd like to put stories up on that interactive map and have photographs. So we'll see, that's down the road. We hope to have dedication events and other events and would love help with planning. So have my address up. AHS edlink @gmail.com. And come see me after the talk. If you want me to give you that again, or I can just get your information tonight. You can also contact the Black Heritage Museum, Scott Taylor. The other thing is that if you are the descendant of a person from an enslaved family in Arlington, I'd love to hear your story. Love to hear how it was passed down in your family. And if you could help us with names, that would be incredible. So please find me. So that is it. Thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions. I have to do our bowl. Yeah. Sure.
John Ball, Moses Ball.
Okay. The question was, could I clarify who was living at the Ball Sellers house? So when were there enslaved people there, I guess, is the question. And when John Ball owned the house, we could not find any evidence of enslaved people. It doesn't mean he didn't hire someone from the neighborhood, but there's no record of it. When William Carlin bought the Ball Sellers house, he had an enslaved person that took care of his wife. Her name was Negro Nancy, and there was one other enslaved person. And William had died pretty early on. She retained the help of these enslaved people throughout her life. And then Letitia Carlin, one of the son's wife, also had an enslaved person in the 1850s or 1860s. So not a huge number of enslaved, but enough. And Wesley Carlin, a son of William Carlin, lived in the Mary Carlin house, and he had quite a few enslaved people, and he ran auctions, and he was very involved in enslavement. Yeah.
Where do you intend to put that stumbling stone?
Well, we are going to be, where do I intend to put the stumbling stone? So we are working with the county on permitting, and if we get the permit, we will put it either, well, there is no sidewalk there. We'll put it on the utility right of way. It'll be set onto a stone and placed probably in gravel, not quite sure, on the grass there. We want it to be near the street or near a sidewalk. We want people to not step on them. We want them to mentally stumble on them and go, oh my gosh, this happened in my backyard. You know, I live in a place, slavery existed, you know, take that in. What does that mean? Yeah,
I'm so glad you said not step on them, because that was my first thought, was, oh my gosh, enough, and then walking on there.
it's a mental stumbling stone. And what they found in Germany is that people come and polish them. You know, it's something that the whole community has taken ownership of. So it's quite lovely. And they've also found, they did research, I think it's Dusseldorf, that incidents of violence against immigrants went down in that city after they started placing stumbling stones. So I find that very heartwarming. And Karen. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I have to repeat the questions. How did I find the document for the woman who sued for her freedom and the case went to the Supreme Court? There is a website on the DC court system. It's called Oh Say Can You See? It's a really good site. And a lot of the African-Americans who came in contact with the courts during the early 19th century, their materials are up there. And all I had to do was put in Simon Summers, who was the man who manumitted her mother, and the court case came up. And he lived in Fairfax, and then it became Alexandria. So he was an Alexandria County person. Yeah. So, and then I actually Googled it, the court case, and it's been written on a little, not very much, even though I felt like it was a powerful story. Sure. In the back. Okay, someone wants me to talk about the bottom, which is I wrote an article about it, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, 2018. And there was just an article about it in Arl Now over the last day or two. So that was an African-American enclave that was started before the Civil War, around 1850. And it was populated by free Blacks that had come in from Fairfax County, but the bottom is really right on the border of Fairfax. So they didn't come that far. And I actually look at the area as straddling both counties, although I focus on Arlington. So they lived there through the Civil War, Reconstruction, and they had they were in between 2 Civil War forts. So that period of time was really difficult to be living there. And I was able to document some of what happened in their lives. And then after 1900, they were slowly pushed out into more traditionally Black neighborhoods like Halls Hill or Green Valley. But yeah, but I was able to find fragments of their past there. It was mostly bought up by developers by that time, but there was one family left there. So yeah, it did have an effect, but small. And then VDOT bought a portion of it. And now VDOT has given Arlington County first rights to buy it. So we'll see what happens. There's a county council board meeting this Saturday. If you have an opinion on what should happen, go. Yeah.
I assume that your presentation visuals would be available on the website. I'm wondering how long the policy is for the organization. How long
Forever. We keep it up on the website forever. But Annette, do you have an idea of when it'll go up?
We're all volunteers here.
Yeah.
The Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority has a similar program for the Carlisle House. Called Tell Me Your Name.
Oh.
We had identified 67 enslaved people who were at the Carlisle House, the province of John Carlisle. when we hired Manny McCoy, we found 44 names. I was just wondering if you had any contact with Manny McCoy.
No, but maybe I will. You know, he owned land in Arlington, a lot of land in Arlington, but it just didn't seem like he lived here himself with his enslaved people, that it was, you know, he would rent out to tenant farmers.
You're talking about.
Carlisle, John Carlisle. Oh, I didn't repeat the question. So the question was, a gentleman here volunteers at the Carlisle House, and they have a naming program for the enslaved that were enslaved by John Carlisle. Any other questions? Yeah.
Did you find any information on enslaved people that might have escaped to the British during the War of 1812?
Did I find any enslaved people who would have fled to the British in the War of 1812? No.
So I recently found out that Mike Lee,
Okay.
Frank and Lucy Lee's son, who went to what's Nellie's house? Nellie's house, Woodlawn. They went to Woodlawn.
Woodlawn, okay.
There, but their son Philip went to Arlington.
Okay.
Okay, he went to George Wash's house. Okay, I know.
Wait,
that his
Custis
son-
or
Huh?
to Mount Vernon or
No.
Arlington House?
When they divided up all the enslaved, well, Frank was Washington's slave, so he was free. Lucy and her 4 kids were Custis's. So Lucy and 2 of those kids went to Woodlawn, and then Philip went with George Washington Park Custis up here at Arlington House.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Well, I recently found out that Mike had escaped from Woodlawn and went to the British, and they find him up in the Halifax, Nova Scotia. And he supposedly got on board the boats when they were at Alexandria, the British fleet there, okay? So I always wondered, since Philip was the only one that was at Arlington, I wondered whether Mike tried to go up to Arlington and say, hey, I'm leaving. You want to go with me?
Right.
No, but that's why I asked.
Yeah. No, I had a difficult time finding things like that. Also, I looked at the Revolutionary War period and didn't see much action here that I could focus on, as you know, with the British, you know, providing freedom for African Americans. Yeah. If you find anything, please let me know. Yeah.
So a follow-up question, and he's talking about the Carlisle House. So in your database, is it truly the footprint of Arlington County today? Or do you gather information from Alexandria City within the District of Columbia?
Well, I've tried very hard to just use Arlington's footprint from today. Not combining it with Alexandria City. Throughout the 19th century, Arlington was called the country portion of Alexandria. So a lot of times they differentiate in records, like so-and-so lived in the country portion. And I was able to get a little bit familiar with some of the names. And then that really helped me figure out a census is put together by where you live. So I could get to a certain point on the census and say, I've hit where Arlington starts because I know this name. And then figure that most people in around the names I knew were Arlington, you know, from this area. But I did have some trouble. Like Upton Hill was partially in Fairfax and partially in Arlington, and I didn't know what to do. And then Peter Vasilopoulos said, you need to use those enslaved people. You need to have those names for those enslaved people. So anyway, the border area was difficult for me. So I might have gotten some enslaved people who really shouldn't be on my list, but then again, I might have missed a few. So
And it's evolving, like you say, you're adding to it. It's a living document.
correct. Yeah, in the back.
we put it back to a couple of comments that connect the enslaved.
Everyone okay with that? That's good.
Do you want to come down to the microphone?
No, it doesn't work.
Well, you're speaking.
Oh.
So the computer online and here.
Excuse me one second. Would you mind coming to the podium so that the people who are looking at this via Zoom can hear you?
Oh,
So there is a man named Michael G. Shiner. He was originally born and enslaved in Maryland, but his enslaver would bring him to Washington, D.C., early 1800s, where he would be leased out to the Navy, because at this point, the government and the Navy was one of the largest, I guess, entities that were leasing enslaved laborers. And so he would keep a journal for 60 years while enslaved. So there's an amazing military historian. His name is John G. Sharp. He would actually transcribe all 60 years of this journal and actually has put it out on the website if people are curious. The website is history.navy.mil. And so what we see in this particular journal, I've forgotten the year, it may be 1831. But in 1831, John G. Shiner's wife and 3 of his small children would actually be taken to Franklin and Armfield's office on Duke Street. And he would be one of the few people to be able to get his wife and his children out of this slave pen, because that's in part why Franklin and Armfield were so successful. So you mentioned the cotton boom, but in 1808, the international trade of enslaved folks was essentially stopped. You had some people who were doing it on the black market, but in general, it became far more lucrative for you to breed your enslaved laborers or to rent them out or to lease them. And so Franklin and Armfield essentially revolutionized the domestic slave trade after 1808. So they would start their firm in 1828. They would only be in business maybe 10 years. By the time that they had left business, they would have offices in Baltimore, Natchez, Mississippi, as well as New Orleans. In fact, they would actually get agents. And so Austin Woolfolk was a prominent trafficker in Baltimore who actually ended up selling Frederick Douglass's aunt. But they would drive Austin Woolfolk and really small traffickers out of business who were reliant on the coffle system, which was mentioned earlier. So only the first year really did Franklin and Armfield use the coffle system, which required that they actually march physically their enslaved captives down to Louisiana, to Texas, Georgia, South Carolina. By the second year that they were in business, they were able to get their first ship. And I think by like 2 years into being in business, they had at least 4. So Michael G. Shiner's family would end up in Franklin and Armfield. He would be able to get them out, but his help was actually Francis Scott Key, who's at the time the district attorney of Washington, D.C. Yes. So I don't know how he necessarily had these connections, but they actually have the paperwork where Francis Scott Key put in, I guess, the legal paperwork to get them extracted. They ended up going from the Franklin and Armfield firm to like a small jail holding pen, but eventually you'd be able to get their family out. So yes, and so just so if anyone is interested in like Michael G. Shiner, I think one of the best ways to memorialize the enslaved is to actually read what they wrote, right? And so we have a man who was enslaved for so long. Like when he was writing, he was there for several inaugurations, including both of Lincoln's. He would be writing about the snow riot of 1834 or 1835, which was a major race riot in Washington, D.C. He would write about Nat Turner, which happened in 1831. So please check it out. And then the other thing, oh, say that again.
What's your name?
Oh, my name is Courtney Morris. I'm a stray. Shiner. Michael G. Shiner. And if you go to Navy Yard, that's where he worked in a paint shop. I think they have like a plaque or a sign dedicated to Michael Shiner somewhere there. And of course, the Franklin and Armfield firm is a museum now. It does not actually focus on Isaac Franklin and John Armfield. It focuses more so on prominent African-Americans and African-American history in Northern Virginia. But on the first floor, they do talk about a little bit of their business and slave trafficking. And the other things I wanted to say, so Franklin and Armfield made so much money that there are institutions and legacies that are still with us today, right? So out of Isaac Franklin's money, we would have Belmont University, right? Belmont, I believe, is in Tennessee. Okay. Out of Armfield's money, you would have the University of the South in Sewanee. I believe that is also in Tennessee. Armfield would get out of the business of slave trafficking and then go into hotels, which is interesting because for small-time traffickers, it was actually hotels and restaurants and taverns, but hotels that would, you could sell your enslaved laborers there, but they would also serve as a holding pen. So you would pay the proprietor a certain amount of money and they would hold your enslaved captives until you got enough that you wanted to sell and go somewhere else. And so he would open a resort called Beersheba Springs, which is still around today. It was purchased by the Methodist Church. Out of where one of Armfield's properties would be, it's now a wealthy gated suburban development with names dedicated in part to the men and slave trafficking. Tennessee, for Armfield, Tennessee. I think he named his plantation Bad Times. And so Isaac Franklin had a ton of property. He had at least 7 plantations in Louisiana. And he also had, I think, property or land in Texas and another state I'm blanking right now. But the 7 plantations in Louisiana would be combined, sold to the state of Louisiana, and they would make it into Louisiana State Penitentiary. And now it's known as Angola, which happens to be one of the names of the plantations. So I thought those couple of things were kind of important. Thank you very much. You're up next, 2 months. All right.
Last question.
Is there one more question? No. Let's go. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.